One of the most difficult aspects of having a child with a visible disability or difference is navigating the world socially. Hey everyone, my name is Cynthia Veronica and I have two children, a 3-year-old named Samantha and a 5-year-old named Sebastian, and Sebastian just happens to have achondroplasia, which is the most common form of dwarfism. So my son's disability or difference isn't what makes life more difficult necessarily, although there are certain medical things that we have to deal with here and there. It's more society or other people's reaction to it, and also the limitations of society that make it difficult. The blatant staring or reactions towards my son can make life a little disruptive on a daily basis. Complete strangers are constantly reminding me that I have a child with differences. And I mentioned in a previous video that it's almost like having a celebrity for a child. So it has taken me a little bit of time to figure out what to do in certain situations. So in this particular story time, I am going to talk about a moment in which a little girl noticed my son and approached him. I want to talk about how I reacted in that certain situation and how I feel I should have reacted instead. And I should preface this by saying that we all stumble in these situations. I have certainly stumbled, or I've reacted in a specific way and later regretted it. So I'm still learning. I am fallible. We live and learn from these situations, and as time goes on, hopefully we get to the point where we eventually feel and exude confidence, love, pride, and even empathy towards the other person. But it's definitely a journey to get to that place. So when Sebastian was about 3 years old, he and I walked into a toy store. And there was another little girl that was also in the toy store, and she must have been around 4 or 5 years old. And she took note of Sebastian. So in that moment, Sebastian, gravitated towards these toys that were kind of in the middle of the store. They were in this sort of like circular island-like furniture. So he just ran over there and started playing with some toys in this area in the middle of the store. The little girl was with her parents, her mom and dad, and she started pointing at Sebastian and started saying, "Look, see, I told you he was little." She was commenting to her parents about Sebastian. I looked over at her parents and they didn't seem to know what to say. They just kind of ignored her and kind of looked away, and she just kept repeating herself. And she just kept saying, "See, I told you he was little." And she said it maybe about half a dozen times. And it got to the point where it was just awkward. I didn't know what to say. Her parents clearly didn't know how to address it either. So it was just really an awkward moment for a while. The good thing was Sebastian didn't really notice her. I mean, he was 3, but also he was distracted by these toys that he was playing with. So he either just didn't notice her or didn't really care about, what she was saying. So she said this about half a dozen times. Clearly, all the adults involved are visibly uncomfortable. And finally, I just say, "Come on, Sebastian, let's go." And the father of the little girl kind of followed my lead and said, yeah, come on, let's go. And I pulled Sebastian away. I went in one direction, and the little girl and her parents went in the opposite direction. So when I thought about it later, the encounter just really bothered me. And I think what just bothered me most was I just didn't know what to say in this situation. I thought I really want to say something positive and make it okay, but I just didn't know what to say. I knew the parents were, embarrassed. They probably had good intentions, but were very embarrassed by their daughter and what she was saying to, in regards to my son. So I really just had to reflect on it. I also felt bad because here's Sebastian's peer clearly pointing out his difference and pointing at him. And although he didn't seem fazed by it, it upset him because I ended up pulling him away from toys that he wanted to play with. But at that moment, I just didn't care. I just felt so awkward. I just wanted to get out of there. So that's what happened. But reflecting back, I wish I hadn't actually pulled my son away. I wish I hadn't, hurried off and left the situation. And here's the reason why. So first of all, the little girl was stating a fact. She was saying, see, I told you he was little. And if you think about it, she's, relatively right. Sebastian is a lot smaller than his average height peers, or most of his peers. By making that statement, she was also indicating that she was curious about Sebastian. So, not very many people know about dwarfism. I didn't even really know about dwarfism until Sebastian was born. And it was in researching and finding out a little bit more about it that I started to learn. So, of course, a toddler or, a young child around Sebastian's age, of course, is not going to likely have ever encountered someone that's a little person. So she was really just curious about Sebastian and his condition. And she was conveying this curiosity in an age-appropriate way. So when children express their curiosity, it's actually a wonderful opportunity to educate them and talk to them about people with disabilities or with differences in an age-appropriate manner, of course. So what I think I should have said instead was, oh, I see you're curious about Sebastian. Sebastian is 3 years old. And you know what? Sebastian has achondroplasia. It's basically dwarfism, and it just means that his bones grow differently. That's why he's a little bit smaller than most 3-year-olds. But you know what? Sebastian really likes playing with this toy. Maybe you like this toy too. Maybe you guys can play together. When you answer their question, most of the time the child will be satisfied with your answer. And when you point out similarities, that's when you're teaching the other child about embracing diversity. That was a teaching moment. By running away, I was actually teaching the little girl and her parents that talking to other children with disabilities or differences is wrong, or that it's a bad thing. And it's the complete opposite of what I want for my son. So the lesson for me was understanding a child's curiosity, recognizing it, and understanding that thought process that goes in their head, and satisfying their curiosity by giving them an age-appropriate response. It's also important to bring up similarities or similar interests, because that way you help engage the child with the person with differences and help them see beyond the other child's difference. They learn that they could still play, interact, and enjoy each other's company. It's such a simple response, but it sends such a powerful message. The other lesson I learned is that the reason children have questions about other children with disabilities or with differences is because they're not really seeing them in their everyday lives, or they're not really exposed to them at all. They're not seeing them on TV. They're not seeing them in books. They're not seeing them on in Disney movies, for instance. There are statistics that show that people with disabilities are very underrepresented. And when you have this problem on a macro scale, it affects us all on a micro scale. And that's why, life can be very disruptive on a day-to-day basis for a person with disabilities or differences. Also, the parents of the little girl, their response was very familiar to me. I mean, I encountered that before, where the parents of the child says a comment, the parents want to say the right thing, they're embarrassed or ashamed that their child made a comment, they just want to do the right thing, but they don't know how to react. These moments can actually be avoided if you get books. There's so many books on, children with differences or disabilities, and if parents actually took the time to include those books into their child's library and talk about differences, talk about diversity, a lot of these awkward situations could actually be avoided. A short discussion with your child can actually go a really long way. And it's just really important to have these conversations with your children, because it can really just help create a world that is more accepting, more open, and more kind. These were the lessons that I took away from this very short, very brief, but very powerful encounter. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.